Today, we're going to be exploring one of Bleach's more mysterious relationships, a relationship in the series that's not quite so cut and dry, and instead comes with its fair share of baggage, although that only serves to make it more interesting. This particular relationship really showcases the profound effect that deep childhood bonds can have on a person, and the depths to which that person will go for someone who means the world to them. Throughout his time in Bleach, Gin Ichimaru was often one of the series' most popular and most compelling characters, and I can attest to this. For me, Gin was one of Bleach's earliest and biggest draws. And during his tenure in the series, Gin was mostly portrayed as a slimy, slippery, snake-like villain, a conniving schemer who seemed to enjoy victimizing others. But of course, there is a whole other side to him as well, a secretive side embodied by his relationship with Rangiku Matsumoto. And you might be thinking that these two characters don't seem to share anything at all. They seem to have very little in common and are a strange duo to pair up. But the truth, of course, is that both of them were originally survivors versus the world, and that the two of them only had each other to look out for. And so in this video, we're going to be taking a look at that relationship between Gin and Rangiku, the timeline of decisions and actions that would take them on their parallel trajectories before they eventually come to an unfortunately tragic head. Before we begin the video, guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure to do that now, as you're in the perfect place for Bleach content like this every single week. Don't forget, if you enjoyed the video, to give it a thumbs up as well. It really helps support me, and it also means that the video gets more exposure and more Bleach fans like yourselves get a chance to watch it. And if you enjoy what I do here as well, we also have a Patreon where you can get videos like this one early, and you can support me over there for as little as $1 a month. Everyone getting a shout out on screen right now is doing just that, supporting me on Patreon, helping me do what I enjoy, which is bringing you this content. And so everyone doing that, thank you so very much. I think what makes Gin and Rangiku such a compelling pairing is that they don't seem like they would necessarily fit together. They don't seem like they would mesh all that well together, and as I mentioned, they seem to have virtually nothing in common. However, the depth and the strength of their childhood bond has essentially helped forge the very person they are today. And we get a glimpse of their shared childhood history together as early as the Soul Society arc, but it was really only Gin's betrayal and his last words to Rangiku before escaping to Waco Mundo that really sent the fanbase into a frenzy around these two characters. So I think the easiest way to do this is to go through a timeline of Gin and Rangiku's relationship in Bleach, picking out the most important parts, discussing it as we go, and really just trying to break this whole thing down. These are two very popular characters at the end of the day, and it's safe to say that this relationship they had that was ongoing, that was showcased throughout flashbacks, and their opposing ideas, their opposing ideologies, and the fact that they were two childhood friends on opposite sides of a brutal war really helped to kind of flesh them both out, turn them into really fully three-dimensional characters, and made them both quite fascinating. And so the timeline of their relationship begins quite a while before the present story begins. This is before even Turn Back the Pendulum, so we are older at this point than 110 years ago. And a very young Gin Ichimaru is out in the middle of the Rukongai, somewhere way away from Seirei, one of the most lawless parts of the Soul Society, a deadly and dangerous place where you have to fend for your own survival. And Gin is out here and he's collecting dried persimmons, which are his actual favourite food in the series, until he stumbles upon a pretty strange sight. He sees a young girl lying on the ground next to a decimated hut, and she looks essentially close to death. And what's interesting about Gin, if we start right here with him as a young boy, is that his first instinct seemingly is to go and help her, and this marks a very different Gin from the one we would eventually get in the present day storyline. So he finds her collapsed on the floor, and his first question to her essentially is, are you hungry? And he offers her a persimmon, and he says that if you are hungry, then you must have spiritual energy, because that's the only way you can feel hunger as a soul. And Rangiku accepts, and she notes that he must have spirit energy as well. Now, this seems like a pretty innocuous first meeting. Gin has gone over, he's found somebody in distress, and he's potentially saved her life, and the two of them begin living together from this moment onwards. However, I then had to try and piece the timeline together a little bit after this, because Kubo actually deigns to show us something that happens just before this moment, and then a little bit afterwards as well. So while initially this does seem to be a pretty innocent meeting, Gin actually notices Rangiku lying on the ground some way away, but also notices a group of Shinigami nearby laughing and joking to themselves while holding and clutching these strange glowing orbs, these strange violet lights. And Gin is, pretty unsure as to what they are. But of course, knowing what we know and what Gin would eventually know, we can piece two and two together, that these thuggish Shinigami are the ones who destroyed Matsumoto's house, shaved away a part of her soul, and left her for dead. So Gin has stumbled upon a pretty tragic event. Basically, these Shinigami were going around the Rukongai to people who supposedly nobody cared about, and so clearly somebody thinks they won't be missed, and they are attacking them, destroying their homes, stealing parts of their soul, and then leaving them to die. Gin notices this, but presumably for now thinks little of it, and then goes and helps Matsumoto out. However, much later on, presumably, well, it's definitely not the same time because Gin's not wearing the same clothes, but he's out collecting firewood now that he and Matsumoto live together, and he discovers another strange scene. Those very same Shinigami that he saw having attacked Matsumoto are now bowing before somebody else. Clearly, they were working for somebody when they attacked Rangiku, and this man is obviously very familiar to us as readers, bespectacled with brown hair and a pretty sinister smile. This is, of course, Sosuke Aizen, before even his time as a vice captain. Now, clearly what's going on here is Aizen is ordering these criminal Shinigami, essentially, to go round Rukongai and shave away the souls of Rukongai citizens who at least have some kind of spiritual energy, some kind of Reiatsu. And then they are taking it back to Aizen for reasons Gin has no real idea why. All he notices is them pouring that same violet substance they stole from Rangiku into a strange glass container. However, seeing this, Gin manages to put it all together. He realizes that Aizen is the one who ordered the attack on Matsumoto's house, destroying her home, injuring her, and nearly killing her. These guys were just the lackeys. This other man, he is the boss. And it's at this point that Gin realizes, now having lived with Matsumoto, grown fond of her, grown friendly with her, seen what she has had to suffer through, that Aizen is going to pay. And he resolved to one day kill this man. And it's kind of crazy to think that Gin's entire trajectory would be decided by this very moment, where he's just out innocently collecting some firewood for him and his new little friend, their little house that they now have together, just trying to survive in the Soul Society's harshest of environments, a wasteland, essentially. And somebody from the Seirete has been sending out men to attack these people and steal their souls. So it's not hard to see why Gin would realise that was a massive injustice, but really he is just so fixated upon Aizen because of how much he cares for Rangiku. But clearly and crucially, Gin keeps this information from Rangiku and chooses not to tell her anything. And this mysterious element of Gin would be something that Rangiku would grow to kind of hate about him. Something that she would always find so annoying would be that he would disappear and not tell her where he was going. And this is, of course, both literal and figurative. Gin is a very mysterious character, someone whose ambitions are completely unknown to Rangiku, despite the fact that they wholly involve her. And this is something that has kind of dominated their relationship, this idea of Gin not abandoning her, but leaving her to go and do his own thing without telling her anything about it. And it's interesting because they are almost diametrically opposed. Matsumoto cares for him, she worries about him, so she wonders where he's going, what he's up to. Gin cares about Matsumoto, worries about her, but his single-minded mission is a dangerous one. You know, he knows that taking on the Soul Society is going to be dangerous in any shape or form. Shinigami are powerful, they have weapons, all this sort of thing. So he deigns not to tell Matsumoto anything to keep her safe, and the two of them aren't quite compatible in that sense, because they care for each other, but then they don't have that communication. However, for now, they are living together in their little hut, and there's a really nice moment where Gin asks Matsumoto when her birthday is, to which she replies that, you know, she has no idea. It didn't mean anything to her before she met Gin, so Gin decides to make it the day they first met. It's a really nice gesture, and again, something very different from the Gin that we would come to see and know in the future. Someone who doesn't really seem to care about anybody. Here he is all about putting Matsumoto's feelings and her safety first. And it's nice because it's almost like out here in the Rukongai where they have nothing. Giving her a birthday is something that she has control over. That's something he's giving back to her. This birthday is yours, you know, it's a special day for you, and it's something that we can celebrate together. Even if it doesn't technically mean anything, even if it's not technically accurate, it's still something nice they can have. It's kind of interesting that Gin, you know, seemingly comes from this same part of Rukongai that Matsumoto does, and he knows of birthdays, presumably knows when his birthday is, maybe, whereas to her it meant absolutely nothing. But it is nice to see him care for her to this extent. But I also wonder if symbolically this day, the day they met, is supposed to be the birth of the present day version of Matsumoto. This is when symbolically that version of her was born. So, as we mentioned, Matsumoto feels that Gin has a bad habit of leaving without telling her where he's going, and this is of course something that would bleed over to the present day, when the two of them would seemingly grow further and further apart as Gin kind of closed in on his ultimate goal of bringing down Aizen. But this would of course lead to pushing Rangiku away and leaving her behind. In many respects, Gin is a truly tragic character, you know, and a lot of it is kind of his own doing in a sense. Like it's him who decides to go on this singular mission with one goal in mind, and we'll kind of get to the logistics of his plan later on. But you know, Gin really strikes me as the kind of person who knows how to care for someone, but in doing so is pushing them away, and that's difficult. But at the same time, it's very easy to see where he's coming from. You know, certainly as time goes on, the closer he gets to Aizen, the more dangerous he must realise Aizen is, how twisted this person actually is, and the depths of Aizen's depravity must become more apparent to Gin, and so he must continue to do everything he can to push Matsumoto away. And we even see this right towards the end of his story as well, which is nice. Now, with chapter 416, we get what I assume is the next part of their timeline, although this certainly more than anything is speculation and conjecture, because there's not a lot of context given to this scene, although I do really like it. So I've kind of essentially come up with what I think is happening here, but this is not, you know, confirmed in any sense of the way. But in chapter 416, Gin returns from yet another of his mysterious outings, and he returns back to their little hut, where Matsumoto kind of rushes out into the snow, shouting, you know, where have you been, where have you been, only to see that he is now draped in the shihakusho of a Shinigami and actually has blood on his face. Certainly, Gin is not a Shinigami yet, as he mentions that he's going to become one. So what's going on here? Where is this shihakusho come from? And clearly, who has he killed as well? And so because he's not a Shinigami yet, we can still determine that this is before Turn Back the Pendulum. And if you ask me, I think this is probably a very seismic event that would change who Gin is forevermore, and would begin to kind of darken his heart. You know, as he went further into his mission, this is what really turns him into that more cruel, sadistic person we know moving forward. But I think, what I think's going on here is that before getting to Aizen, Gin has decided to kill the lackeys who were stealing souls. My guess is Gin decided to hunt down and kill Aizen's men, those same ones who he saw attacking and destroying Matsumoto and her home, and he's stolen one of their Shihakushos and returned home. And that's essentially what I'm guessing is happening here. I don't really know how else he would have come across a random Shinigami. I don't know why he would have decided to kill a random Shinigami. It makes sense that he would have perhaps intercepted one of these goons out on their continuous missions for Aizen, butchered him, and decided, and maybe he's even killed all of them. And he kind of decides, if I'm going to get to Aizen, I need to actually become a Shinigami to get close enough to deal any real damage. So that's kind of what I'm guessing is going on here. It is left quite up in the air where Gin has been, what he's been doing, so that's kind of neat in a sense. We are left a bit like Matsumoto to potentially imagine the worst, but the blood on his face is certainly quite telling. And so yeah, with my guess being that Gin has been hunting down these men, it's not hard to imagine that Gin may have some inherent hatred of Shinigami, much in the same way as Tosen does, which would perhaps explain to some degree his willingness to turn against the organisation. Rather than sharing information with them and going that way, Gin goes kind of renegade, he takes a roguish path to deal with this all on his own. And even later on, we see that he takes almost some kind of sick gratification from the fact that he's the only one who knows how to kill Aizen, and he's willing to let the Gotei 13 pretty much just be cut to ribbons to keep that secret to himself. And I do think there is a sort of spiteful side to Gin who kind of relishes their pain, presumably because of the fact that the Shinigami were allowed to, seemingly with impunity, raise the Rukongai to the ground. This has been long debated among the fan base, but I have always taken the opinion that Gin is inherently not a good person. Or at least not after this point anyway. That's why I think this is supposed to be a seismic change that changes him from that innocent, good-natured boy whose first thought was to go and help Matsumoto to someone who thinks that, killing and murder is the best way to get what he needs. And this Gin would only grow more twisted over time the darker he became, to the point where he is outwardly taunting Rukia. There's a one point where Rukia thinks she's going to be taken to the execution. Gin comes along, promises, kind of gives her this notion of hope that he could set her free if she wants him to, before, just being like, just kidding. And then she screams in anguish, and you see Gin's lips curl up in a villainous grin. That is not somebody who is going against Aizen. That's Gin being evil for the sake of being evil. He's not a nice person, or at the very least, he just seems to hate the Shinigami. And it's not hard to really see why. Obviously, he hates all of them, probably kind of holds most of them in the same esteem as Aizen. Not necessarily to the exact same degree, but it's still the same organisation that was sheltering Aizen at the end of the day. So it's not hard to see where Gin comes from, but also I fully rebuke the idea that at this point in the story he is a good man, because he's not. I think he is a man who is too far gone. He's too deep into his own mission. He's too deep into his own trenches, and he's lost sight of who he once was. But when we get to the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, we see that Gin has been taken in by the 5th Division after having graduated from the Shino Academy in just a single year, making him a prodigy. And we know, I believe, from the bootleg book, which I have here somewhere, that he and Matsumoto actually joined the academy at the exact same time. I think it's highly likely that it took Matsumoto a fair bit longer. She probably completed the academy in the normal requisite amount of time, and so Gin almost had like a head start to get a bit closer to Aizen and kind of leave her behind, essentially. You kind of get the impression that when Gin was like, I'm going to become a Shinigami and change things for you so you'll never have to cry again, Matsumoto maybe didn't even want that, didn't want to become a Shinigami, but decided that she would go with him, maybe even against his wishes. Because you do get the idea that Matsumoto has kind of been dogging him this entire time against Gin's wishes. Matsumoto just desperate to find out what Gin wants. What is he doing? What's his aim? And Gin being like, please leave me alone. I'm trying to do this for your safety. I know things are going to get ugly when they have to. But of course, Gin and Aizen would now grow close from this point on. Gin kills the 5th Division's 3rd seat at Aizen's behest, and Gin takes up a spot under Aizen that he would continue to have for virtually the entirety of the rest of the story. And it's really cool to see these two come together. You know, Gin always wanting to kill Aizen. Aizen, at least at this point in the story, must be unaware of Gin's true motives. Otherwise, that's just ridiculous. Even though at some point he says that he knows Gin wanted to kill him, or at least try and betray him. But these two grow closer, and even at some point, Aizen decides to tell Gin the secret to avoiding Kyoka Suigetsu. I'm not entirely sure why he does that. Someone as meticulous and as careful as Aizen, someone who even turns up to a battle scene with a shield on the back of his neck. I don't know why he would give away the greatest secret he has, unless he genuinely trusted and even maybe to some degree cared for Gin. And I do think their relationship is another one that would be very interesting to explore at some point in the future, as Gin is certainly the only person who, it seems, can break through Aizen's icy facade and even understand a little bit about the man underneath. But much, much later, now in the Soul Society arc, Toshiro and Gin have been having a clash. The two of them have locked blades, and Gin tries to kill Momo in an effort to escape the situation, only for Matsumoto to arrive. And this is really the first time they kind of lock eyes, the first time they interact. And I do wonder, you have to wonder how often they talk, how little they talk since the two of them have reached the upper echelons of the Gotei 13. You know, Matsumoto could feasibly go and speak to Gin pretty easily, you have to assume, but it does seem like he has done his best to distance himself from her. But she blocks his blade. Obviously, Matsumoto, even if she is a childhood friend to Gin, she is loyal to Hitsugaya, and Hitsugaya has reason to believe that Gin is conspiring against them. But she tells Gin that if you continue this fighting, you'll have to face me, at which point Gin leaves. And then on Sokyoku Hill, Aizen and Gin and Tosen are cornered by the Shinigami, and Gin is captured by Rangiku. But when they escape using Negathion, Gin basically turns to Rangiku and says, you know, I wish I could have been held by you a little bit longer. And then he turns to her with a strange, incredibly uncharacteristic look on his face, and he says, I'm sorry. And it was these two words that sent the fan base into a frenzy. Like, people just couldn't fathom what was going on here. Up until this point, Gin had been truly depicted outside of his flashbacks as a child as a monster. Like, Kubo exaggerated his facial expressions so much in this arc, made him look so villainous. And then for Gin to show a rare moment of supposed sincerity with Rangiku really brought into question what was actually going on with their relationship. And of course, this I'm sorry would be basically like the almost foreshadowing, but the kind of driver of Gin's entire characterization moving forward. And it's funny because I believe in the dub he says something like, so long, which completely destroys that entire premise. Oh no, wait, he says maybe next time, which again is just not right at all, and still kind of defeats the whole purpose of what he would say later on. And after his defection, Matsumoto kind of sits by herself, you know, looking out of a window, and that's one of the things I really like about Matsumoto, is that she is a bit of a caricature, you know, she's very much played up a lot of the time by Kubo, but unlike some characters in the series, she shows rare amounts of introspection, and I find that to be really interesting. And it really makes her this three-dimensional and quite deep character, and her relationship with Gin is the kind of the main factor behind that. But she's sitting there and she kind of says that, you know, Gin, this is so stupid, and she says that she even hates him. Obviously she doesn't, but she's trying to rationalize what's going on here, what's just happened. Clearly she's wondering, you know, why has he joined up with Aizen? Why has he betrayed them? And again, this is another example of Gin just leaving without telling her what's really going on with him. And you do have to kind of wonder, like, at what point is it not worth it for Matsumoto to worry about someone who's clearly so aloof all the time? But for a relationship like this that's built on a foundation of true childhood bonds where they only could look out for each other, they had no one else to care about, you kind of sympathize with Rangiku, why she wants to bring Gin seemingly back down to earth. She then looks at a small vase of flowers on the table. I'm not entirely sure what this is supposed to represent, as I can't decipher what the flowers are, if they are a particular flower. I feel like they might be, but perhaps the only thing to take away from this is that they do seem to be intertwined, or at the very least overlapping, which maybe makes Rangiku think about her connection to Gin. And when she talks about how stupid it is, perhaps she thinks that their lingering connection is stupid and maybe something she needs to rethink. But later she gets drunk with Izuru in a pretty nice scene, because obviously Izuru is also very hurt by what's happened, and they kind of profess how much they hate Gin. But it's nice that Matsumoto also kind of seems to have a clear head, because she has a moment where she kind of considers Hitsugaya, as he's obviously going to see Hinamori, before getting back to the party at hand. So she's kind of almost feels like she's putting this on for Izuru's sake, but, there's obviously more to tell there. At the start of the fake Karakura Town battle, where finally these forces are going to potentially meet once again, Hitsugaya asks Matsumoto if she has any doubts or remaining or not, and Matsumoto has kind of a grave look on her face before even saying, I don't really know what you mean, and Hitsugaya decides not to press it any further. And I do like this, because there is another facet to this Gin Rangiku relationship, and that is Hitsugaya. Hitsugaya comes across kind of as a bit of a bit kind of closed off, and almost, not that he's uncaring, but that he maybe cares more about the job than personal close relationships. But really, Hitsugaya does care an awful lot about those around him, and he has a antagonistic relationship with Gin in the Soul Society arc, and he must know how that's making Matsumoto feel, as it seems like she is perhaps more open about her past than Gin is. But much later, towards the end of the war, Matsumoto manages to regain consciousness after having been wiped out by Ion earlier, and witnesses Gin still fighting. The battle is still going on, and she kind of gets to her feet and begins running. The timing is a little bit weird here. Clearly she's obviously going to Karakura Town, the real Karakura Town, but Aizen and Gin wouldn't leave for Karakura Town until an entire chapter later. And then it seems later on like Rangiku arrives as if she's just caught up with them. So I don't really know where she's running to at this point. Obviously she's heavily injured. Izuru mentions that she's only just alive, so maybe she's just moving very slowly. I don't really know, but regardless, she does eventually arrive in the real Karakura Town to head off Aizen and Gin. And this is a nice moment. The fateful reunion was something that fans were very excited about. We kind of hoped that we would find out, what was going on behind Gin's final words to her as he departed Soul Society. I personally was really looking forward to this, because, like I said, Gin was one of my favourite characters. I was desperate to maybe find out a motivation, get some insight into this extraordinarily closed-off character. Kubo does a wonderful job of making Gin incredibly hard to read. Even, up until this point, Gin has been almost testing Ichigo to, because he hopes to have someone who can supplement him and kill Aizen should he fail to do so. And you have to also assume that at this point, Gin is thinking that it's maybe unlikely that he will succeed in killing Aizen, or at the very least there's a chance he won't, because Aizen's done a number of things that he hasn't told Gin about, such as, being able to pull off 90s level hardos, and also fusing with the Hogyoku being the primary one that Aizen kept to himself. Presumably because at this point he was suspecting Gin of treachery, but regardless, Gin is now realising that maybe not that he's out of his depth, but there's more to Aizen than even he knew. And so he's hoping that Ichigo can be fully prepared and strong enough to take over should he need to. But these are things that you have to work out for yourself, because Kubo does a good job here of showing, not telling, and that whole idea really encompasses Gin's character. He is very closed off, and you have to kind of decipher him in a sense. But Matsumoto is a slightly more straightforward character, and she straight up asks Gin, why are you working for Aizen? Why did you betray Izuru? But Gin kind of does what he does best, and he deflects it back at her, and he says, are you really asking me this? Are you really talking about Izuru, or are you talking about yourself? And he then kind of says, he gets close to her, and he even touches her chest briefly, and he says, oh, Rangiku, you're in the way. And it's supposed to be like this tender moment, but Gin suddenly reveals his true colours. Maybe he is actually evil after all, as he seemingly attacks her with his Zanpakuto. There is some weirdness to this scene, which we'll get into in a second, but knowing what we do know about Gin, you can only imagine how his heart sank when Matsumoto turned up in Karakura Town, because Gin must have been thinking to himself, any second now I am going to attack Aizen, and it's either going to be him or me who walks away from this scenario. For Matsumoto to turn up, Gin must be thinking, like, what are you doing here? You know, like, I have tried my very best to push you away, to keep you safe, because this scenario is only going to end in tears. So for Matsumoto to show up obviously shows her deep, unflinching, you know, the care for Gin. But he doesn't want her there, and this is still those diametrically opposed viewpoints that we mentioned earlier about Matsumoto constantly having to chase Gin because he doesn't tell her anything, and Gin constantly having to run from Matsumoto because he doesn't want her to catch up. He doesn't want her to get hurt, and now we're going to see the fallout from that. So the reason he seems to kind of go all sinister on her, and he's like, you know, you're a nuisance, you're in the way, and he threatens her with his Zanpakuto, is just this idea of him continually forcing her away. Because if he had turned around to her and been like, I'm actually here to assassinate Aizen because he stole something from you a long time ago, and I really care about you, and I want to do this for you, she would have absolutely told him no. But to just flat out knock her out kind of removes her from the equation entirely. Now, the strange part for me that I mentioned a minute ago is that Rangiku wakes up from a Kido spell that she deduces to be Hakufuku, which is basically just a spell that knocks somebody out. You know, we see Momo use it on someone in the Soul Society arc, I believe, and it just kind of puts you to sleep. What I don't understand is that it does seem like Gin stabs Rangiku in the chest, and I just don't really know why. I might be missing something. But he brings out his Zanpakuto, and the next time we see her, she does seem to have a wound here, blood kind of going across her collar, and she mentions that she has had Hakufuku used on her, so why has she been injured? I don't really know what that's all about. Because I'm guessing Hakufuku covers her Reiatsu, because Aizen can't sense it later on, unless the injury is supposed to somehow stop her Reiatsu? I don't really know. I'm not entirely sure what that's all about. If you know why she suddenly has an injury, why it seems like Gin attacked her, despite the fact he was going to knock her out with Kido anyway, do let me know in the comments below. But we know that Gin then tries to assassinate Aizen using the final true ability of his Bankai, which is a lovely reference to Matsumoto, in that his sword, for a moment, turns to ash inside its enemy, which of course is a reference to Haineko, to Matsumoto's Zanpakuto. But Gin's gambit fails, and after so many years of single-mindedly wanting to bring down Aizen, he of course is unable to do so, although he comes much closer than many other people, basically obliterating Aizen's body and literally stealing back the Hogyoku. So Gin quite literally wanted to get back what was stolen from Matsumoto, because he takes the Hogyoku and maybe was going to try and extract her soul from it. I'm not entirely sure, but his plan is quite literal. Unfortunately for him, as we mentioned in our Hogyoku video, the Hogyoku already sees Aizen as its permanent master, and it reforms in his body as he transforms and rips Gin apart. And I just have to stop briefly here again and say that I do think Gin's timing was a little bit strange. He does seem to wait until way too long before making a move on Aizen, and there are a couple of things at play here. Crucially, he doesn't know that Aizen has fused with the Hogyoku, so presumably going into the Fate Karakura Town arc, he thought that Aizen was still just a quote-unquote regular Shinigami, and would therefore be much easier to kill. And he is right, to be fair. If Aizen hadn't fused with the Hogyoku, and the two of them had gone to Karakura Town, and Gin had stabbed him in the chest and used Kamishini no Yari, Aizen would probably be dead right now. So that's unfortunate for Gin, and it also seems like, as I mentioned, there is that element of spite as well, like he didn't want the other Shinigami to know how to kill Aizen, he wanted to be the one to do it, and he wanted there to be no chance that anyone else could. So it does seem just very unfortunate on Gin's part that he had those selfish instincts, and he did want to wait until Aizen was so close to achieving his goal before ripping it away from him. It's just unfortunate for him that Aizen was one step ahead. But we reach our tragic ending to this relationship, where Gin is lying on the floor, his body ripped asunder essentially, and he kind of watches basically he is literally dying at this point. Matsumoto arrives on the scene, she cries out to him, she's sobbing over his dying body. But he thinks to himself, you know, I'm so sorry, I couldn't get it back, I couldn't get back what he stole from you, but I'm glad I said sorry, referencing, you know, the end of Soul Society arc. And this in itself is a little bit weird. Him saying sorry there as like a fail-safe for if he didn't achieve his goal kind of implies that he thought he wouldn't achieve his goal, which is a little bit weird. So I think the sorry is probably multi-layered. Gin said sorry because he was like, I'm sorry I'm leaving you again. I'm sorry I'm going with not saying anything. I'm sorry for turning my back on you once more. But, it's nice. And it's in a way nice because he can't really speak at this point. He's basically on death's door. So I guess he's happy he has already apologized in advance, essentially, for the pain he's caused Matsumoto. And so after the war, Matsumoto is, of course, left on her own. Gin is now gone, and she finds that she can't move on. People she knows are already moving on from the big battle. Renji, Hisagi, Hitsugaya, everyone around her is kind of resuming their normal activities and their training, but she finds that she just simply can't. Gin has once again, but this time permanently, vanished without telling her where he's going, and it is a really sad moment. Matsumoto is, as I mentioned, a deeply kind of tragic character, just like Gin is. The two of them bonded in this way that would only ever lead to tragedy. But in her defense, it also makes a lot of sense that it would be harder for her to move on than it would be for most anyone else, because she lost a lot more than anyone else did. She lost a childhood friend, and in that moment she even found out that Gin was trying to kill Aizen. So she knows him as the hero she maybe always thought he was, even if he went about it perhaps the wrong way. So it is a really sad moment for her in particular. And Gin's existence, when you look at it from this perspective, is a really sad one. Defined by something that happened when he was an incredibly young boy. His existence since then was really only fleeting, touching so very few people's lives in a way to get them to care about him truly like Matsumoto does. He exists in an almost ghost-like state for the rest of the Soul Society. He exists only really, to his mind, for this one reason. To get justice for Matsumoto, and to everybody else he appears as like a monstrous figure, so it's a difficult burden to bear. And so Matsumoto kind of now is able to keep him alive in that sense as somebody who did try and do some good. She notes that by leaving her nothing to remember him by, it's very akin to the way he used to just walk out and not tell her where he was going, and she didn't like that about him. However, she notes that he probably knew that by leaving her something, she truly would never be able to move on, and that indicates that she thinks he knew her very well, and that was something that she did always like about him. So all this time, it does just go to show that spirit of friendship they have was being kept alive. And I know some translations translated that final line of hers as "that's something I always loved about you," which I think was supposed to imply a romantic relationship. But, the Viz one says liked, and I've never thought they had a romantic thing. I just thought they were deeply platonic, deep childhood friends who, more than anything, survived together, and that created a pretty unshakable bond. But unfortunately, Gin became twisted in his journey for vengeance and turned into a bit of a monster, but at the end of the day, he was still focused on that goal of avenging Matsumoto. And that's it for this video on Gin and Matsumoto's relationship. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below what you think about these two individual characters. What do you think about their relationship in the story of Bleach and its tragic ending? But I'd really like to know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit subscribe as well if you haven't done already. And until next time, guys, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.